Hello, I'm Pip Courtney and welcome to A Taste of Landline and the women from Snowy River.
Here we are, 4, 5, 6 generations later.
I remember sitting on the front of my grandfather's saddle. I learnt how to count cattle with him. It's a tradition that I'm teaching my kids as well.
Queensland's spectacular scenic rim is just southwest of Brisbane. Most of the agricultural activity is centred on the fertile valley floors, but one couple is having great success farming native finger limes high up in the hills. If you look up from the little town of Rathdowney, you can just make out Ian and Margie Douglas's hilltop farm. They bought the land 30 years ago after Ian, a Melbourne-based barrister, spotted an ad in the paper.
A couple of days later we were on a plane and we came up here and fell in love with it. We bought it that day, signed a contract on a small piece of paper just outside the Rathdowney pub. Having done that, we went in and had a couple of scotches.
It was just a matter of, yes, we love it. And we're still having the same love affair 30-odd years later, which is crazy, but we are.
Yeah, there's some good ones over here.
After they scrapped plans to grow avocados, a wild native finger lime tree caught their eye.
Beautiful. And I think I told my brother, don't eat that when it was fruiting because it could be poisonous, which is ridiculous, I know now. He decided to taste it and said it was delicious, and that was it.
They planted 1,000 trees and waited 4 years for fruit.
That'd be good for lunch.
Early on, though, it was a struggle, as neither Margie or Ian had farmed before.
Many times that I used to get on the phone, even to chefs, and say that we grow the native finger limes, and they then didn't really know what they were about. So it's been fabulous that now people do know, and people are coming to us for them, which saves me a lot of work, a lot of talking anyway.
Social media has proved an effective and cheap advertising medium. The Douglases use Instagram to showcase the stunning farm views and what's inside the odd-looking citrus.
We get so many inquiries from overseas through Instagram. You know, we would get as many inquiries from overseas as we do just local.
One order posted to Canada the day Landline visited came via Instagram. But a bigger thrill was a 1,000 kilogram order to Japan. The Douglases spent months preparing the shipment, their biggest ever, and at $40 a kilo, their most expensive. The one disappointment, the fruit had to be sent frozen.
One of the problems we have with some exporting to some countries is that because it's a citrus, those individual countries believe that fruit fly must be associated with finger limes, which is not true. So we can't send fresh finger limes to Japan and other potentially huge markets, China, India, the United States, and even little old New Zealand. We not allowed to send them there because of fruit fly concerns.
Here you go, Scott. Yeah. They're beautiful with avocado as well.
Yeah. Excellent. It's like little lime angels dancing on your tongue. Each individual little polyp explodes and the flavour lingers on the forefront of your palate for a long time. We have only got a 4-year advantage on the international market. From a bureaucratic time, that time can disappear very quickly. So we need to set time frames and virtually have outcomes in place within 18 months, I would suggest. When we talk about, as a government, making the transition from the resources sector to a more innovative economy, I see no better example on such a fledgling industry in working with them to work through the hurdles that present themselves. And if that's not the job of a federal member in an electorate, well, I don't know what is.
Ian Douglas is 80. The retired Queen's Counsel says he loves his new job, working alongside Margie every day.
Really good.
He says, though, their friends are surprised by their all-consuming retirement choice.
They think we're crazy, but I think they secretly they admire what we've done too. And it's certainly very hard work. I've never worked harder than I have in the last couple of years in doing what we've been doing, and Margie works very hard as well. But it keeps you young.
And they have no plans to slow down. 10,000 kilos will be harvested this year, and next year they hope their maturing orchard will yield nearly double that.
I really want this industry to succeed, and we're only one grower, probably out of 50, and most of those would have operations smaller than ours. Potentially it's a very good industry for this country. It's my ambition before we can't do it anymore to make sure that it's working properly.
Go on, Mia, give it a shake. Does it shake?
Yes,
it does shake. What about the green ones? Do they come off? No?
Yeah,
That's pretty good. It's good fruit. You like the bloom?
It's got nice, the bloom.
Hello, I'm Tim Lee. Cattle have grazed the Victorian high country ever since the earliest days of European settlement. It's always been a very male-dominated affair. But for one remarkable family, it's the women who have been pivotal from the very start. In Victoria's high country, brooding skies and brisk winds herald the coming of winter. Cattle have grazed these alpine meadows and snow-gum-covered peaks since early summer. Now, the chilly nights have made them restless to return to the lower country.
There's every chance it'll snow at any given moment.
The weather sort of comes in quite nasty. We haven't been caught really, but you don't want to be in the snow.
So in the grey of dawn, the riders saddle up. And flanked by eager cattle dogs, ride off to muster. This is a branch of the Treasure family, a name synonymous with the Dargo High Plains.
We have actually driven the cattle down the last 2 years in the snow, and it is damn cold.
Aside from cold and hunger, there's another inducement that brings the cattle out. The word salt has echoed across the mountains since the first cattle began grazing the Victorian high country in the 1830s. As you can see, salt is a really powerful attractant, and as these cattle come forward and taste it, they bellow and they draw cattle from right across the mountains into the muster.
Salting's one of my favourite things to do. It's a beautiful thing to watch them come out of the bush, calling back to you sometimes. It's lovely and it's a nice mustering tool.
It takes several days of riding through the bush to round up all the stock from far-off valleys and ridgetops. After a careful count, the trek down the mountains to the home pastures begins. The older cows know the routine.
And the same ones lead off. It's quite cute to see. You know, there's a gorgeous old red-eyed cow here of Lyrics, and she leads the way along, and they stride out behind her, which is really good.
The boss drover here is Krista's daughter, Lyric Anderson. She has been on this path since she was old enough to ride.
Horses are absolutely essential to what we're doing. We don't do it on motorbikes or anything like that. We just follow the same tradition that we've always done. I remember sitting on the front of my grandfather's saddle. I learnt how to count cattle with him. It's a tradition that I'm teaching my kids as well.
Moving cattle in and out of the high country is a practice as old as pastoralism. Up to the high country for the summer months, back to the lower lands before the winter snows arrive. Usually just before Christmas, Lyric Anderson oversees the journey up the mountain. Starting from the mountain hamlet of Dargo, the mob, made up of cattle owned by various family members and bunched together, is mustered from holding paddocks. Among the riders is Lyric's husband Lance and their daughter, 8-year-old Rhyme. Tell us about your horse.
His name's Elite. He can be a bit of a bugger, but he's a great horse.
Her 4-year-old brother Huey is also on horseback.
I'm going to do the same as Daddy.
You'll be a stockman.
Doing cattle.
So too is their grandma Krista and great-aunt Rhonda.
It's wonderful, yes, and to see young people who are learning the ropes, and there has to be a lot of intergenerational knowledge passed through, yes.
The Treasure family settled amongst the snow gums on the Dargo High Plains in 1878. For 2 decades, it was their permanent home, even in the winter months when heavy snow often blanketed the ground. But what sets this story apart from many others is the pivotal role that women have played from the very beginning. The lure of gold brought George and Emily Treasure and their young family to these Alps. It was a Spartan, isolated existence.
But then she heard that the runs were coming up for renewal. So she got the eldest boy with her and she went down to Omeo and secured the leases to the Dargo High Plains.
Lynette Treasure, Krista and Rhonda's cousin, is another great-granddaughter.
When great-grandfather came home at the weekend and she told him what she'd done, he said something like, "Well, good God, woman," he said, "what so-and-so do you think we're going to do with I think it was some thousands of acres of how are we going to stock this?" And she just said, "Well, we will."
The various branches of descendants have determinedly kept up the practice of communal alpine grazing.
Here we are, 4, 5, 6 generations later.
The women have also remained central to this story. Lynette's aunt Frida Treasure, later Frida Ryder, rode the high plains with her 4 brothers and could hold her own with the best of them.
Frida was really special. She was always a lady. She was never toughened by rough speech or behaviour, and yet she could drive a 4-wheel drive vehicle, she could shoe a horse, she could use a gun, shoot a dingo, camp for weeks alone down in some of the holdings that she had, and play steel guitar and sing, do painting.
Oh, it's a wonderful. It's simply marvellous, I think. I've been doing this since I was big as nothing. I did my schoolwork partly up here.
How many of these masters have you seen?
About 38, at least. But a few when I was little before that.
Frida Treasure left an indelible mark on history.
I look back on my life and I think she was a really special role model for me because I saw that a woman could be more than just a housewife. I'd like to think that it's a strong lineage, humble in its own way and yet with a lot of innate pride.
You'll even see on this ride that strength in the women still carrying on those, traditions and teaching their children, but also they're the leaders in a way. So I love seeing that because so often we think of mountain cattlemen as bearded old men. That's been stereotyped, you know, sort of hermits in the bush, and it's not the case, you know.
At the start of every drive to the high plains, the cattle are always eager, but initially it needs to be a slow, measured pace.
The dry cattle move really quickly and the cows and calves don't. It's always a juggling act to keep the front slow enough for the back to catch up, and if you rest the front, the back needs a rest as well. They probably need more of a rest, but once they get there, then you want to send the front on. It's complicated and you need people who know what they're doing at the front and the back all the time.
Especially dodging tourists in cars. The road soon gets steeper. And in recent decades, so too has the path for Victoria's high country cattlemen. Environmentalists have waged a largely successful campaign to ban cattle from Crown land.
They've been banned from the national park, however, there's a lot of cattlemen all around the periphery. The state forests are still home to the mountain cattlemen and the 6th and 7th generations of families that used to inhabit the true high country.
Unless we can convince our politicians to rethink,
the battle to retain alpine grazing rights has long been a political fight.
The ban on grazing in the Alpine National Park directly affects 45 farmers, but the ripple effect, argue the cattlemen, is profound.
This decision is a family tragedy for my mother, my brother and me.
And the cattlemen have had to fight for their very existence, the right to continue their culture and heritage.
That's just something that needs to happen. There are plenty of people behind us that know it needs to happen, and there's a lot of support out there.
The journey up the mountain is slowed by cows with calves. So while the first day is a steep climb, it's a short stage of about 7 kilometres. The overnight halt is a holding yard well off the road. The camp stirs well before dawn. Breakfast is brief. The bush is alive to the sounds of activity, human and animal.
Oh, don't do that.
The cattle, bellowing their impatience, are soon on the move. To stop them straying into the bush, good dogs are essential.
We all love our dogs. So we've got multiple numbers of dogs, and generally each of us have got a young dog, and it's fairly chaotic sometimes with them.
By the third day, and some 30 kilometres later, the cattle reach the high plains and are turned out on the alpine meadows.
They look pretty happy, don't they? Yeah, we'll be up to check on them throughout the summer, and then we'll be back to drove down in autumn. They should come out looking nice and fat and sleek and walk down beautifully out of the cold and return to home in good nick.
We're proud of our cattle. They're a good shape, good doers.
Krista Treasure is also proud of her offspring and content that they'll carry on this tradition.
They love it because, well, we're all living the dream, aren't we? The people in the city are wishing that they were here with us in the searing heat and the pouring rain and the thunder about 20 metres away from you. It's a good lifestyle, but there's not always a fortune in it. You know, we live in hope. We're gamblers.
It's the first time anyone's tried to have a dual crop of sugarcane and sunflowers at the same time. This is like biological diversity on steroids. It's really trying to emulate what is happening over there on those hills.
G'day, I'm Sean Murphy. Aquaculture now accounts for about 40% of Australia's seafood production. And while most of the growth has been from Tasmania's salmon industry, there is a new kid on the block. It's Australia's premier native freshwater fish, the Murray cod. And new farming systems are proving a perfect fit for irrigators on the Murray River. At the dawn of time, according to Aboriginal belief, the Murray cod created the Murray River. And now the nation's premier native fish is driving one of Australia's fastest growing aquaculture industries. Cage growing systems in purpose-built dams are offering huge potential to irrigation farmers along the Murray-Darling system, providing a diverse new income stream and double use of their precious water.
The fish are grown in cages. The cages are about 2 metres wide by 2.5 metres deep. By doing that, we keep the fish up off the bottom and stop any muddy tastes that are traditionally associated with Murray cod, especially dam-raised Murray cod. The big things here is just being able to reuse that water twice. 2 incomes off every meg of water. We're being forced to become more efficient with our water, and returns per meg in the fish probably outstrip any grain crop by tenfold. With inland aquaculture, getting rid of that waste water and the waste from the fish is a big issue. Here we're able to irrigate all of the water back out onto crops, especially in the summertime when our water use is high. But on the plus side, we're also not putting any waste materials back into the environment, so we're using them all on farm.
Matt Ryan gave up dry land farming 5 years ago to start Griffith-based Bidgie Fresh. And with the help of 3 contract growers, he's selling about 50 tonnes a year into the Sydney and Melbourne markets. Citrus growers John and Marisa Triaca invested about $350,000 in a fully stocked dam.
Oh, look at the size of that one now. That's massive.
In 3 years, their fish have paid for the system, while their oranges have barely earned the cost of production.
Well, it's given us hope, really. We've stuck with citrus for such a long time, and this opportunity came along, and we thought, well, why not?
The water only cost me $600 to run, one dam here. With the oranges, it cost me, I think, about $4,000 for water, and the return is probably more out of the fish than 100 acres of oranges.
And are you thinking about expanding?
If I was 10 years younger, yes,
Yeah.
I would, but I wish I was 10 years younger, I'd go, but I'll stick to this at the moment.
Roger Commons is one of the biggest cotton growers in the Murrumbidgee irrigation area. He says the advent of user-friendly technology has been the breakthrough that is finally delivering on the potential for Murray cod aquaculture.
And I think this is the time for it. It just feels right for me. Look, I've been interested in aquaculture for a long time, but couldn't get all the pieces of the puzzle to sort of pull together. Whereas, once we got involved with Matt and understood his system, it joined the dots up for us. This area has an abundance of flat land and water, and it's just going to be a really good fit.
Roger Commons partnered with Matt Ryan last year to develop a world-class fish nursery. Matt Ryan says it'll alleviate a shortage of fingerlings for new growers, but more importantly, it'll bring continuity of supply to the market.
Most of the restaurants we've spoken to have said, we're happy to have your fish, we love the fish, but the biggest issue in the past is we get it, and then 2 months later we can't get it. So for us, that's a really important thing.
Murray cod is the fastest growing sector of the New South Wales aquaculture industry, but current production is barely able to supply the domestic market.
I think there's about 60 million tonne of seafood a year consumed in the world. If we grew to 10,000 tonne, we're a speck in the world markets. And what makes this such an attractive proposition for us is that the quality of the fish, the product itself, the chefs love it, consumers love it, it's been selling itself. It's currently the most expensive farmed fish in Australia.
Griffith-based chef Luke Piccolo features a range of Murray cod dishes on the menu of his fine food restaurant Limone.
We really strive hard to using the entire fish because it is not a cheap fish, and we realise that. We actually make sure that we use the belly, the head, the bones, everything in all different preparations. So we actually prepare this fish in about 6 or 7 different preparations. It is a very, very versatile fish. We actually cook it in 10 different ways. From deep frying, from charcoal, we actually cure it and cook it in a bacala style as well. So we found that the fish is actually, it takes well to nearly every single style of cooking.
To be honest, I found it really tough, seeing things die, and I did go through a stage where I didn't go out into the garden at all. I found it too hard. I think they're extremely important, especially in the time of drought. This gives the men something to come home to, just a break from that barren earth outside.
Well, that's the program. We hope you enjoyed it. And we're here right through the summer. Next week, the amazing desert greenhouse.
It's not just a first for Port Augusta, this is a first in the world.
We look at pulses or legumes and Australia's medicinal honey.
Over millions of years of bees making honey, it's the only food that actually can't be spoiled.
Don't forget, you can catch us on iView, Facebook and Twitter. I'll see you next week for another Taste of Landline. Bye for now.